Democrat Valerie Foushee is the new representative for North Carolina's 4th Congressional District in the 118th Congress and one of its nearly 80 new House members. She told C-SPAN about her priorities as a legislator and her childhood in North Carolina, where she attended a segregated school and spent lots of time with her large family.
I'm the oldest of 6, 4 girls and 2 boys. Very close-knit family. We actually, my parents raised 7 kids because they raised a first cousin with us. And so we spent a lot of time in church. We spent a lot of time singing at home. And interestingly enough, my father organized us into 2 fan groups for the Baltimore Colts and the Washington Redskins. So we just had I had a fun childhood.
Sounds like a ruckus childhood.
It could be. It could be.
And why the singing?
The singing because my father enjoyed singing, and again, that was something else he did. We sang a lot. We listened to a lot of music, and that was just something that made me feel good. I think that we know what singing does, we know what music does, but singing is inspirational, and so as a young child, spending a lot of time in church, I joined a choir at 7 and sang in a choir actually until we reduced our choir numbers during COVID such that we were being careful about transmission.
Do you have a favorite song?
I have several favorite songs.
Favorite gospel song?
Most of them gospel songs, but right now there's a song by C.C. Winans that I really, really love, and it talks about God's faithfulness. So that's probably my favorite at this moment.
And is that something that you think about or rely on a daily basis?
All day long.
In what
All
way?
day long. Because it reminds me of who I am and whose I am and my calling to service, and that's my purpose. But I am also guided, and so I try my best to be obedient about that. So that song lifts me and it reminds me of that purpose.
Where does your political philosophy come from?
I think my political philosophy comes from my life experiences. Having grown up during a time of segregation, where there were no public accommodations for African Americans in my town, having attended segregated schools until I was in 6th grade, but then those trials that came with integration, and getting to a point where I believe, particularly for my high school class, that we learned to not just accept, but embrace each other. And from that, we still have really, really nice class reunions that are integrated. The planning is done by an integrated committee. We attend those functions. And so a lot of what I believe comes from my belief in people and understanding that for the most part, we all want the same thing. We want to be free. We want to be heard. We want to have access to what we knew as the American dream. And that's basically what I fight for every American in general, but particularly for those whom I represent.
You spent years overseeing a prison, is that right? What was your role?
Not a prison. I was a jailer for the local police department where I worked. And so we had an 18-hour lockup facility. And so I was trained to manage that jail. Anyone who could not make bond or who could not be released within those 18 hours, or after those 18 hours, I should say, were transported to the county jail. So my responsibility as a jailer was to keep them safe, and if they stayed more than 12 hours, to provide a meal that we contracted from a local restaurateur.
How did that shape you and your perspective today?
That's an interesting question, but what I would say is that I was trained and taught to treat all people with dignity. And so those who were in our custody were treated as such. My responsibility was to keep them safe, keep them from leaving that facility until the process had occurred. And I think anybody who knew about how we operated understood that to be the way we operated. As an administrator who, I've moved up to being an administrator who impacted policy. Those policies that we created were designed to treat people with dignity.
When did you
We
run?
had some missteps, but let's just say the goal was to ensure that they were treated fairly.
When did you first run for a public office, and why did you decide to do it?
I first ran for public office in 1997, and that was as a candidate for the local school board. My purpose in that, after being asked to do it, was to ensure that we were given equal access to opportunity as it related to education for every child. I am the mother of 2 sons, and my research showed me that somewhere along 4th grade, regardless of an African American boy's income level or whatever, they started to drop in achievement. So my goal was to ensure that that did not happen with my sons, and certainly not for others. And I felt like that was something for which I should advocate. And given the opportunity, I would spread that for all children, and particularly children of color. So that was my first opportunity, and I'm happy to say that we were successful in winning a seat on that board, to which I became chair before leaving the board.
And what did you do after that?
After that, with some prodding and prompting, I ran for the county commission and was able to secure a seat on that board and served as chair, and the first African American woman to serve on the Orange County Commission.
What are your legislative priorities now that you are in Washington, D.C.?
They are probably the same as they were in the North Carolina Senate. First and foremost for me, it's voting rights, and particularly coming from North Carolina, which I believe is a battleground state for ensuring that we keep that at the forefront of our priorities. I do want to continue to work on that. Again, also access to affordable health care for all Americans. I think health care or access to affordable health care should be a right. I think that is a human right. And I could not leave off fighting for women's reproductive freedom. And we all have a responsibility to our environment. So those are things that I want to continue working on as a member of the 118th Congress.